Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24 únicamente en I24 News.
Welcome to Welcome to or back to this special broadcast on I24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It is day 59 of Israel's war against Hamas. IDF commanders say they have almost completed their operations to establish full control over the northern half of the Gaza Strip, though fighting still continues there. And they are now expanding operations in the Gaza Strip's southern half. The focus now is on the Khan Yunis area, where the Hamas leadership is believed to be embedded. Israeli authorities are urging civilians in Khan Yunis to relocate to safer areas along the coastline and the southern Egyptian border. Meanwhile, Hamas continues to launch rockets from Gaza at southern and central Israel. In the north, Hezbollah has also resumed its daily barrage of cross-border aerial attacks. Israel responding with airstrikes on targets in Lebanon linked to the Iran-backed Shiite militia. And as Israel continues to celebrate the return of some of the hostages held by Hamas, family members of those still being held hostage in Gaza have demanded and received, apparently, a face-to-face meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other members of the war cabinet that appears to be set for tomorrow. Well, for more, let's go now down south and our correspondent, our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, who's in Sderot. Jonathan, a little earlier in the program, we heard the nightly briefing by Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, basically confirming that the IDF has expanded its operation, shifting focus, even though there is still mopping up operations going on in northern Gaza, shifting its focus there onto the south, in particular that area known as Khan Yunis.
Yes, I can tell you from where we are, we're facing the neighborhood of Jabalia. That's in Gaza City. There's still operations here, but yes, most of the focus is further south, the area of Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis being the second largest city in the Gaza Strip and the biggest one in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, and heavy bombardment on Khan Yunis all throughout the afternoon. We could hear it very well from here, despite being somewhat further away. We could hear it very well. A very strong shelling, artillery, and the Air Force pounding Khan Yunis. And I think sort of a preparation for a ground offensive which may enter there if Israel has any plans to eradicate Hamas, or at least take away all of their capabilities to pose a threat to Israel. As the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister constantly say, there's no other choice but to go into Khan Yunis as well. This is the native area for Yahya Sinwar, for example. We can assume he's there. Many of the hostages probably also there. So this is clearly the next stage for the Israeli army.
Right, and our Middle East correspondent are also reporting that the internet service has gone down in the Gaza Strip, and we've seen that prior as a sign of Israel expanding its operations. Jonathan Regev, thank you for that. And along with the fighting down south, the fighting in the north has also resumed along the Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah launching multiple strikes, airstrikes across, shelling and rockets across the border today, and Israel responding with airstrikes. Let's go to our Pia Steckelbach, who's in Kibbutz Ayelet HaShachar, one of those communities in the north along the Lebanese border that had been evacuated. And it's looking like, Pia, also in the north, a resumption to basically where we were before the ceasefire, and no indication that those residents of the north are going to be able to head back home anytime soon as well.
Right, Kalev. Well, these skirmishes that we're seeing right now pretty much resemble what we saw before the ceasefire. Hezbollah or other factions in southern Lebanon striking with rockets, with anti-tank missiles, and also mortar shells, and the Israeli military retaliating in southern Lebanon with artillery and also airstrikes. This is what we've also seen today. There was red alert in the community of Kiryat Shmona in the late afternoon. This is a city of about 20,000 residents that has been widely evacuated before the ceasefire. Now, this is just one example of dozens of communities along the Israel-Lebanon border where civilians basically left their homes without really knowing when they will be able to get back, because the threat that Hezbollah poses sitting right on the border with Israel is not expected to go anywhere, even when this war with Gaza will end. Now, not only Kiryat Shmona has been targeted. We're hearing reports of at least 6 rockets targeting the city, falling in open ground and not in open areas, not causing any casualties. But also earlier today, the communities of Shtula and Matat in the western part of the Israel-Lebanese border have been targeted. Now, in both cases, the Israeli military struck back, striking Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. A weapons depot was targeted, according to an Israeli military statement, and also other infrastructural targets, as well as the Hezbollah command center. That happening earlier today. As I mentioned, Kalev, today we didn't receive any reports of casualties, but yesterday an anti-tank missile was fired towards the community of Bet Hillel in the very eastern end of the Israel-Lebanon border, injuring 11 people, among them civilians and soldiers as well. Some of them were hospitalized, and this is very much showing you how volatile the situation is and how tense the situation here is as well. You mentioned the residents. They experienced some calm, at least those who remained here during that week-long ceasefire on both sides of the border. Obviously, also civilians on the southern Lebanese side are heavily impacted by these continuous skirmishes. But now the outcome is very much unexpected, is very much remains to be seen, because Hezbollah has said time and time again that they will make their full-on entry into this war dependent on what is happening in Gaza. And we really see the full resumption of what we've seen before the ceasefire, the resumption of quite regular clashes, provocations, and again, the Israeli military retaliating. We have also received reports that several locations, several villages on the Lebanese side across really the border have been targeted. one of these localities have lost electricity. The Lebanese media is attributing that to an Israeli artillery strike. So, as I mentioned, these clashes triggered by Hezbollah leading those factions that also participate in these skirmishes has impacts also majorly on, of course, the Lebanese civilians on the other side of the border.
All right. Pia Stekelbach there along the Israel-Lebanon border. Thank you for that. And joining us in studio, we have retired IDF Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria. He's a former deputy head of assessment of Israeli military intelligence, former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister, late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Still with us, our senior diplomatic correspondent, Owen Alterman. And I want to touch on, Jacques, a point that Pia just made, which is Hezbollah, have resumed operations along the Lebanon border. It's provocations, it's shooting of rockets, anti-tank fire, in some cases drones and mortars across the border, keeping it in that border area. But as she said, Hezbollah has said it will measure its response based on what is happening in the Gaza Strip. We are now entering a period when Israel, the IDF is preparing perhaps to move into Khan Yunis, take on the Hamas leadership, the heart of Hamas there in Khan Yunis. And the question is whether that is going to prompt some kind of intensification of Hezbollah to take the fight beyond that border area further into Israel, which of course would trigger a major escalation.
Well, I'm not sure that there is a link between what's happening in Gaza with the behavior of
I said
Hezbollah.
They said that. I didn't say that actual is a link.
This is my assessment.
Right.
That is my assessment, because I believe that at this point Hezbollah can just show that he has not disappointed his public, his audience. He has forced Israel to deploy part of its army in the northern border of Israel. He has forced 60,000 inhabitants to leave their houses, and he's striking day after day the targets inside Israel. A precedent never happened in the past, and he has accustomed Israel to a sort of war of attrition. This is what we have we have today, and the fact that he is not going beyond that is not linked with what's happening in Gaza. It's linked with what's happening between Tehran, Beirut, and Washington. There are diplomatic talks between those three about a certain new order in Lebanon, with a new president for Lebanon, a new chief of the army for Lebanon, and lots of reforms to be done in Lebanon, and in return, Hezbollah should withdraw to the Litani, whereas the Iranian would receive from the American a sort of acquiescence concerning their nuclear program and their influence in the region. This is the game between the big guys here. It's not Hezbollah and Israel. It is beyond us. It is beyond us. And this is why I believe at this point we cannot expect, and we should not expect, an expansion of Hezbollah unless there is a miscalculation on the ground. Let's say that what happened yesterday, had this missile which hit Bet Hillel killed 12 Israeli soldiers, then the reaction of Israel would have been different. So this is very tricky, and this is very.
Meaning you don't see it happening, but there could be a contingency if one of these rockets, either on the Israeli side or Lebanon, causes greater damage than perhaps intended.
Exactly, as you see. I mean, most of the rockets. I mean, Kiryat Shmona is not a small city, right, although it's 25. But most of the rockets that are fired at Kiryat Shmona hit, I mean, desert hills, nothing, rocks, right, and rocks, and then we just retaliate the same. We just bomb and shell in Lebanon, or mountains, sort of places, just to say that we are here. So this is the sort of game that we are playing with Hezbollah, and as long as this game is accepted, it finds itself that it suits both America and both Tehran, which are not interested in widening the conflict. They want the conflict to be limited to Israel, Hamas, and not to have a regional conflict.
Right. We should note that Hezbollah pulling back its forces from South Lebanon would simply simply be following the agreement of the UN Resolution 1701, which Lebanon agreed to following the Second Lebanon War.
1701 is dead. 1701 talks also about eradicating all militias in the army, and Hezbollah will not commit suicide. Definitely so. And there's still a leeway, for Iran. I mean, it's playing once in Lebanon. It's playing also in Syria. We have a revival of the Syrian front, and let us not forget our friends in South Yemen, and where they are just acting according to Tehran.
And in fact, speaking of Yemen, let's go to Yemen, because tensions, you mentioned, all we just discussed show that this conflict is not limited to Gaza. It's spread out to other borders of Israel and even into other parts of the region. Tensions, for example, rising in the Red Sea as Yemen's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, who Jacques just mentioned, are targeting commercial ships in those waters, which they claim have ties to Israel. Now, denying the allegations, Israel, in fact, accuses the Houthis of jeopardizing regional navigation. Now, the Pentagon has been reporting multiple attacks on vessels from 14 countries, highlighting the broader implications involved here, as the IDF considers its responses concerns mount over this escalating maritime unrest. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more in this report.
Yemen's Houthis are escalating attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, raising concern for the safety of key trade routes.
The naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces, with the help of Allah Almighty, carried out this morning a targeting operation against 2 Israeli ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The targeted ships were the Unity Explorer and ship number 9. The first ship was targeted with a naval missile, and the second ship was targeted with a naval drone.
The Iranian-backed militia said attacks like those on Sunday would continue until Israel ends its strikes on Gaza. But the IDF denied the ships had any connection to Israel and accused the Houthis of endangering the freedom of navigation in the region.
One of the ships was damaged in a very serious way, and it seems that it could be in danger of sinking, and other one was lightly damaged. This is an event stemming from negative sabotage of the Houthis. We need to see how the world will answer this issue.
The Pentagon said a total of 3 commercial vessels connected to 14 separate countries were attacked in 4 incidents in the southern Red Sea from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. The Bahamas-flagged Unity Explorer bulk carrier was attacked in the morning and then again in the afternoon by anti-ship missiles. Then, the Panamanian-flagged number 9 reported damage but no casualties caused by a missile from Yemen. A third ship, the Sophie II, which also sails under Panama's flag, said it was struck as well but suffered no significant harm. A U.S. warship operating in the area assisted the commercial vessels by shooting down 3 drones, while the Pentagon accused Iran of enabling the Houthis' attacks.
This is also one of those allegations aimed at projections, which are made in line with efforts to deviate public opinion of nations and to cover up crimes by the Zionist regime and the U.S. government.
The U.S. says it will consider all appropriate responses in full coordination with its international partners. But in the absence of significant action, such attacks off the coast of Yemen will only increase in frequency and severity.
And Owen, earlier you mentioned Saudi Arabia and the common interest it may have with Israel over the Gaza Strip and stabilizing the situation there. And yet here we have another area where in some ways Israel and Saudi Arabia are acting in unison. The Houthi rebels firing, main target has been until now Saudi Arabia, now, and to some degree the United Arab Emirates, now turning its fire on Israel as well. So drawing Saudi Arabia into this situation, as well as in a deeper way the United States, taking part in a more active way in this conflict perhaps than in any prior conflict Israel has had.
Yeah, I mean, again, don't forget the reports, Gleb, from early on in the war that it was actually the Saudis that shot down at least one of the missiles that the Houthis had fired at southern Israel. So it shows you the depth and the commonality of the interest. But what's fascinating here and what's been so effective about Israeli policy is shaping this not as an Israel issue, but this issue of global shipping. In fact, a report just out from Israel's public broadcaster that Israel has approached other foreign countries about setting up an international force to police this issue of the shipping lines through the Red Sea. Again, the Indian Ocean is the international highway of the 21st century, right? Connecting Europe and the growing economies in China and East Asia. So Israel framing this as an issue of global governance, not an issue of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and so far succeeding. So it's a great diplomatic success story for Israel, and very, very important, because I think the last thing that Israel wants to do, that we want to see in, I guess we can call it the Israeli-Houthi conflict, is not to create an Israeli-Houthi conflict, not to create the same kind of cycle of strike and revenge and strike and revenge. I don't want to use the hackneyed term cycle of violence, but not to create the same kind of dynamic.
Let's say strike and deterrence.
The same kind of dynamic that we've created in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in places like Lebanon, to not get into that kind of dynamic with at least a civilian population in Yemen that I hope we can assume doesn't have the same depth of hostility to Israel that we see in places that are in our near abroad.
The problem is that the U.S. just was weighing all its power on Saudi Arabia to stop the war.
Right, to stop hostilities toward the Houthis.
And what happened is that the Houthis, instead of staying aside and saying, okay, let's try to reconstruct, they just they are 35% of the population in Yemen. So they hold all the part of the country in the north. Now they have invaded the island of Karaman, which is in the middle of the Red Sea, of the Red Sea, and this means that they are able to threaten much more than in the past the ships that are flotilla facing Somalia, because fighting piracy.
Right.
And the effort is to transfer this flotilla from the coast of Somalia to Bab el-Mandeb and to the Red Sea. This is what the aim of the US and the UK, of course, and Germany and Japan, of course, is very much interested, because this waterway is 30% of the international commerce in the world. This is very, very important, and it might hurt economies, it might hurt the stock markets. Everything is possible because of what's happening right now in Yemen, and the United States must take the lead in order to solve the problem. Right?
And very great Israeli interest that this happens. So obviously, welcome.
I'm going to note an irony here, which is most of the world was perfectly satisfied to let Yemen simmer this way, to great detriment of the civilian population, which didn't receive even an ounce of the media coverage and global attention that has been given to Gaza. It was really only Saudi Arabia that had to deal with it and then was pressured to step back by the United States. But now that is expanding into one of the world's most trafficked waterways, suddenly the world realizes this is a situation we should be involved in. So there is
these guys, these Houthis are completely, uncontrollable. Right. The only one that controls them is Iran, and they just give them all the equipment they need, all the ballistic missiles. This is a country that lives in the Middle Ages.
Right.
But certainly acting against their geopolitical interests, as you, I think, correctly said, and you correctly said as well,
let's
Jack.
see if the world responds. Let's stay with the regional implications of the Israel-Hamas conflict, because after Israeli officials have said repeatedly that they would target Hamas leaders now, no matter where in the world they might be, comes a warning from Turkey, which has been one of the countries that has hosted top officials of Hamas. Reuters today quoting a Turkish official saying that Israel would suffer serious consequences if it indeed targeted Hamas leaders who are there, or in other countries as well, Qatar being one of them that comes to mind. Now, this comes as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan again launched verbal volleys at Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Istanbul today. Let's take a listen to some of that.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the butcher of Gaza, is not only a war criminal, but he will definitely be tried as the butcher of Gaza, just like Slobodan Milosevic, the former president of Serbia, was tried. Netanyahu, the butcher of Gaza, personally revealed in front of the cameras that the issue is not just Gaza or Ramallah, but that he is pursuing expansionist goals. Therefore, defending Gaza and Palestine today means defending Mecca, Medina, Istanbul, Damascus, Beirut, Baghdad, other Islamic lands along with Jerusalem.
Jacques, I almost can admire President Erdogan for his ability to turn on the dime, as the expression is, because, of course, last year he was talking about visiting Israel and meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu when it was interest, and that was even after the prior Israeli operation in the Gaza Strip, and it's almost as if we're flashing back to...
it's right, because Israel represents 5% of the total exports of Turkey. I mean, it's quite sizable. We are number 12 in the countries that are the buyers from Turkey, and Turkey also had profited in the past from our experience in the military industry, and this is the way that Erdogan built his own drone industry, just copied on the Israeli industry. All his armored divisions are just were refurbished by Israeli means, and we find ourselves, because of the Marmara and because of the Erdogan being a Muslim brother, to be in fact in conflict with Turkey. I think it was very unintelligent to express for the head of the Shabak to express himself and saying that we will target anyone, Hamas, in Turkey or in Qatar. This is, I mean, you don't say things like that. And I
should note that report you're mentioning, Ronan Bar, the head of the Shabak, supposedly said it in a private conversation, but he was recorded saying such a thing, which is perhaps unwise.
We're all the time saying that there is a censorship in Israel here concerning security, and the censorship gave the permission for such an information. This is really, I mean, strategic information. This could harm our relations with Turkey. I mean, if something, even if we are not responsible of killing somebody in Turkey, we will be accused now. This is automatic. This is an automatic indictment of Israel, and all those Israelis who are visiting Turkey would become the...
Well, hold on. I want you to stay on that Israelis visiting Turkey, because there was some other news related to Israelis traveling abroad today. Israel's National Security Council issued a global travel warning today for Israelis planning visits abroad, both over concern of terrorist attacks, but also rising incidents of violent anti-Semitism in many, many countries. Now, the NSA released this color-coded map. The green countries you see are a level 1, a low level of threat. The level 2 mustard yellow states are places where Israelis should take some precautions before visiting. Level 3 orange areas, mainly in the Middle East and Africa, are where travel is definitely not recommended at this time. The red areas are level 4 at the highest alert. And some countries have mixed warnings. You could see in some countries going from orange to red. That's because in some countries, either their proximity to Iran or have higher Muslim areas. Now, in general, Israelis are not recommended to even advertise the fact that they are Israeli or Jewish while aboard in the present climate. That map is a pretty daunting panorama, Owen.
Yeah, but it's useless information. This is not useful information for the Israeli public. Let's be honest. When you present information, Clev, that's that general, that broad, that's not specific, I think you reduce dramatically the chances that people are going to listen to you. What, Israelis are going to stop traveling to Europe because it's now colored orange instead of green?
No, well,
doubtful. People may take precautions. I don't think they needed, and with all due respect, the National Security Council to tell them this. This has the feel of those in that office wanting to cover their behinds, I think, more than anything else.
Unfortunately, we were victims in Turkey. We had victims in Kenya.
Jacques, we are going out for a break. Jacques Neria, thanks for joining us. Owen Alterman, stay with us. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Kenya Green.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, day 59 of Israel's war against Hamas. Still with us, our senior diplomatic correspondent, Owen Alterman. And on, we had to go for break for Jack Neria to leave us. But we just heard President Erdogan of Turkey again launch one of his broadsides, maybe his most personal one yet, directed against Prime Minister Netanyahu, branding him a war criminal, highlighting this sort of topsy-turvy relationship Israel has had with Turkey over the past decade.
Right. I wanted to speak to, first of all, the specifics of how Erdogan expressed himself and the kinds of examples used, and then maybe something a way of thinking about where our relationship with Turkey might be headed. First, to quote, he made two arguments, that Netanyahu was like Slobodan Milosevic, right? And that Israel was expanding not just in Gaza and the West Bank, but to all throughout the Levant, to Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, etc., and even to Mecca. Why those two references? I think, first of all, Milosevic, of course, it was a shout out to the West, where Milosevic is a villain, but even more so, Kalev, a shout out to the Balkans, right? An area that Erdogan may see as Turkey's near abroad, especially Muslim communities there, and a way of trying to connect with them, expand Turkey's influence them, and to change their opinions towards Israel, potentially. Again, this is a part of the world where Israel's had very friendly relationships with Muslim populations there. We certainly don't want to see that change. Certainly not on the horizon to see a change, we should be honest. But maybe that's what Erdogan is, a seed Erdogan is trying to plant. And then, of course, to the wider Arab world, he sees himself as the leader of the Muslim world. Hasn't gotten very far, I think, because of cultural differences and maybe antagonisms in some cases between Arabs, Turks, Kurds, and Persians. So there are some real obstacles for Erdogan in doing that, but he sees himself, again, as has often been said, recreating the Ottoman Empire and so forth. The second thing in terms of our relationship, it may be that Israel's relations with Turkey we're going to see them the same way we see Israel's relationship with Russia, right? A country that is hostile, but a country which we feel has leverage over us and which we feel to some degree we need to appease. And again, going to the discussion about the threats, about the threat of Israeli threat of assassination of Hamas leaders in Turkey, maybe we'll see a similar restraint from Israel in that, the same way we've seen restraint in some issues with Russia, though again, of course, remains to be seen.
We'll see if that works out with President Erdogan in particular being so volatile. Now, let's get back to the hostages issue. Now, while most of the attention naturally has been focused on the Israelis who are held by Hamas, the terror group does continue to hold the citizens of many other nations taken in their October 7th raid. At least 32 Thai workers, for example, were taken hostage into Gaza. 17 were released during the ceasefire by Hamas, along with 6 others who were let go before that. That leaves at least 9 confirmed Thais still being held captive in Gaza. Now, a half dozen of those most recently released arrived back in Thailand today. Here's what one of them had to say.
ดีใจนะครับที่ได้กลับมาเมืองไทยก็ขอขอบคุณนายก รัฐมนตรีแล้วก็รองนายกแล้วก็อะไรนะกระทรวงแรงงานแล้วก็กระทรวง
Okay, we lost the dubbing on that. Now, with the departure of most of Israel's foreign workers in the wake of the October 7th terror attack, Israeli farmers are struggling to harvest their crop due to a severe lack of manpower. Now, several private initiatives are bringing in volunteers from across the country to help fill in that gap. Our Rory Shapiro went to check out one of those in the coastal community of Rishbon, and he found that they were joined there by a very special volunteer from a country halfway around the world in East Asia that in some ways identifies itself with Israel.
More than 8,000 kilometers separates Israel and Taiwan, but today it seems that the two countries are closer than ever. Officials from Taiwan have decided to join the current Israeli war effort and volunteer to work in the fields of the coastal village of Rishbon.
Since the whole world looked at October 7th Hamas terrorists in Haro, Taiwan was one of the first countries to express our solidarity with Israel and express our condolence to the perished people. And the political support is very strong. And over the past 30 years, the social foundation between the two societies and people are also very deep-rooted. So we feel it's important to come more support with the civilian sectors, including the agriculture sectors.
This is a part of a project led by Hashomer Hadash, or the New Guard, an Israeli organization which helps farmers across the country. Its co-founder says that working in the field is a prime goal in Israel today, as there is a lack of tens of thousands of workers.
The power of this nation, the power of the people, the power of the society inside Israel, this is the strongest power that we have. And to tell you the truth, I spoke with the Minister of Education and I told him, please let the students come to the field for a few months, to the field, stop the learning and come to the field and work, because people all over Israel need to eat.
Among the volunteers, we found Yanir and Maayan, two students and a couple who decided to take time off university and contribute to local industry.
It's a tough job, but it is very rewarding.
Exactly.
It is nice to see the container getting full of fruit.
I think that working in the field really binds us as a couple.
Yes.
The Taiwanese representative in Israel says that despite the different cultures, Israel and Taiwan have a lot in common.
Like Israel, Taiwan has been under constant threat from our neighbor country, China. We understand the commitment to defend the homeland, and we understand the commitment to exercise the right of defense.
Despite the hot weather, volunteers are not worried by the hard work and continue their contribution, one of many, since October 7.
And getting back to the Israeli hostages now, these are days, you certainly could say, of extreme emotion for Hadass Calderon, who over the past 2 months has become one of the most prominent public voices among those who have family or had family taken hostage by Hamas into Gaza on October 7th. Last week, her two children, 12-year-old Erez and 16-year-old Sahar, were finally freed after having been snatched by the terrorists from kibbutz near Oz, leading to a joyous reunion with their mother last week. But their father, Ophir, is still being held captive by Hamas, along with several other fathers who also saw their wives and children released in last week's deals. And Hadass is, of course, still mourning the deaths of other family members and friends who were murdered by the terrorists on October 7th, including her mother, Carmela Dan. Well, joining us now from Tel Aviv is Hadass Calderon. Hadass, thank you for joining us. First of all, just tell us, all of Israel wants to know, how are your children doing?
They're very happy to be back. They can't stop talk. And it's like, what can I tell you? It's not easy. They're very, very excited. They got through a very traumatic situation. And, all the safety, all the basic safety, security was damaged. And they have a lot of hard stories, tough stories. They said it was like the game Fortnite in the computers, the army game.
Sure.
They said it was the same. They felt like they are in a computer game. They couldn't believe that is what's happened to them. And slowly we realize how we have to help them and to heal them. And the main thing now is to bring the father back.
Yes,
because otherwise yes, otherwise they can't really get healed without to be full family. And they miss him and very worried for him, because now they understand the situation. They know exactly what is getting through and all the other hostage.
Right.
So they're very worried.
Right. Now, I understand. Hadass, you've been a very prominent voice among the Forum of the Hostage, families of hostages. We're getting word today that the Prime Minister has agreed to their request for a meeting with the full war cabinet tomorrow. I don't know. That's a report. I presume you would be there, of course. What would you say what will you say, or if you're given the chance, what will you say to the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, and Benny Gantz, the members of the War Cabinet?
I will tell them they must rush. They must act immediately. To make solution. They start in a good way, all this. They got a solution and this kind of deal that start very well. They must continue. They must make all of the hostage come back. It's not my job to tell them how and the solutions. They have to solve it. It's their job,
Sure.
They have to solve it, and immediately. And now when we hear all the hostage who come back, all the kidnapped who came back, we know even better than before how we must rush. Otherwise, some of them won't survive.
Right. We are hearing these reports of the mistreatment, the deaths of many. There are some voices in the Forum of Hostages that requested this meeting, in fact, because they feel that maybe it's not enough of a priority, or the government, or they're not doing enough. They're not seeing the urgency there. Do you have that feeling that among at least the senior members of the government, they may have other aims. They may be seeing the other aims as being more urgent, the elimination of Hamas, which of course all Israelis want to see as well?
It's very hard to say. In the beginning, I had this feeling, and that's why I fight. I said, this must be the main goal all the time, because I didn't feel it's the main goal. I can't tell you, it's very difficult to answer these questions. I want to believe they're doing their best, and I want to believe they act wisely and with good judgment. What can I?
Right.
The only thing I know is that now we are 2 months after, and they're still there.
Right. There's a question.
It means that not all the diplomatic ways been done. And I said they must make a pressure on Egypt and Qatar and whatever. They must make. It's hard to say, but they. I know it's very complicated situation. It's very complicated because of both sides. Hamas side is very complicated and very cruel and very. The both sides must understand that they must make an end to this tragedy.
Right.
And to be more flexible, to be more, I think that both sides suffer. And it can't be continue like that.
Right. Now, there are other players involved here, the international community, other governments, international organizations. In fact, we see the president of the International Red Cross making her first visit there to Gaza today. I should note that the Forum of the Hostage Families released a statement demanding the ICRC make a greater effort to obtain access to the hostages in Gaza. I want to get your own personal take on that. What message do you have to the ICRC president today as she was in Gaza?
I can't believe that till now the Red Cross and the UNICEF didn't reach didn't see and didn't go and didn't reach to meet the kidnaps. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean, what? It's there. It's what mean? Why they exist? Why it's exactly for this kind of moment, which they have to act and go and see and save and help this helpless citizen. How come they didn't visit yet? How come they didn't go into Gaza and see what's going on there? People there, old people don't get the medicines. People starving there. People in very bad conditions, underground, without see the sky and the sun.
Right.
For 2 months now. How come nobody visits them till now? I think they not have any, how can you say? If they don't reach them and they don't do any act, I can't find the word, sorry.
No, I understand. I
can't find the word. They shouldn't exist. That's what I mean.
Sure. All right.
Because they don't do their job. They shouldn't exist. They don't have the right to exist if they don't do what they have to do.
I understand. All right.
I'm sorry because my English is not the best.
Your point is coming across. Your point is coming across very clear there. Hadass Calderon, we of course share in the joy of seeing the safe return of your children, of Sahar and Erez, and of course continue to share in we join in your mourning for those relatives, your family members who passed. Maybe their memory be a blessing, and of course most of all now wish for the safe return of Sahar and Erez's father, Ophir, from his captivity, along with all the other hostages who are still left behind there in the Gaza Strip.
Don't forget them.
Okay, thank you.
Don't forget.
I understand.
Fight for them.
Okay, we will. Hadass,
I can't feel it with my happiness because I'm in so anxiety. So it's like I'm happy. I'm so happy that I had a miracle. It's really like a fantasy, like a miracle. I can't believe my children back, really. But I got this miracle, but I still so anxiety because we didn't solve the whole problem. So please keep on and show it in the TV. Don't forget them. Don't forget them. Do the fight to bring them back.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, Hadass Calderon, thank you for joining us again, and I hope you can join us again when all the hostages, including Ophir, is released. Thank you for joining us.
Soon, very soon.
Well, that's a happy ending. Unfortunately, relatively for her children, unfortunately, more details have emerged about, as she mentioned, some of the conditions that the child hostages were kept during their captivity in Gaza. As Hadass just mentioned, some were beaten, subjected to psychological torture as well. For more on that, here's Efrat Bron Harlev, CEO of the Schneider Children's Medical Center, where many of the freed children were treated.
But none of us could imagine, not even me, that I see the toughest children that come to us during these last 30 years, the toughest conditions, the toughest medical situations that we have to deal with. None of us have seen such a tough situation as receiving those 19 children 6 mothers and 1 grandmother back from captivity during these last 10 days. We heard stories of 2 sisters being together in captivity with nobody else around them, and the older sister deciding how much she will eat so that she can keep some of the food for her 80-year-old sister. So she would not eat for days, so that her young sister should eat. Can you imagine such a decision being made by a 15-year-old girl? The last time that I've read about it was about 80 years ago in the history books of us, Jews without their state.
Shocking, and I'll echo Hadass Calderon on the where is the International Red Cross streak, speaking out more strongly about that abuse of children in captivity. And moving on, did Hamas profit from its October 7th attack by, you could say literally, making a killing in the stock market ahead of that terror raid? Well, a new study published by researchers at New York and Columbia universities has examined what they say is suspiciously heavy trading in Israeli companies and global financial markets in the days just prior to the October 7th attack, specifically the shorting of those Israeli stocks, meaning, for those who don't know, that's placing bets or puts that those stocks would lose value after October 7th. Now, Israel's Globe's Financial Daily checked that report out in the U.S. It said it did exaggerate the amount of potential profits that were made by these positions, these stock positions, saying that the report said potentially billions of dollars were made, but apparently due to some bad basic math by that report, they substituted cents for dollars, basically. They greatly exaggerated the profits that could have been made. However, Globe said there was some suspicious trading around the short selling, specifically of Israel's Bank Leumi, the country's largest lender, which was in the amount of some $8 million, still a substantial amount. Well, joining us now is Dr. Alex Coleman. He's an economic expert at Tel Aviv University. First of all, Alex, it sounds like something out of a James Bond movie. In fact, this was a plot line in a James Bond movie of terrorists or organizations shorting stocks before launching a terror attack. But there is a real-life precedent for something like this, isn't there?
Osama bin Laden did exactly that. So before the September 11 attack, he had short positions on airlines and insurance companies, realizing that insurance companies are going to lose so much money on the loss of the Twin Towers, and airlines are going to, people are going to be scared flying, so airline stocks would also fall. So that's basically the biblical concept of killing and also taking possession.
Okay.
So,
all right. We should note Osama bin Laden's family, one of the largest construction firms, wealthiest families from Saudi Arabia, and he had worked with them, and he knew something, I guess, about financial markets.
Probably.
Let's look at this report out of the U.S. As I said, the Globe's Financial Daily says there's a big problem with it. You could explain that it kind of exaggerated what may have happened, but said there might have been something like this similar.
Well, first of all, we should remember that Hamas is incredibly sophisticated from a financial point of view. First of all, because it's defined as a terrorist organization, all the donations, all the money flowing has to flow under the radar. So they are using cryptocurrencies in order to receive donations and to manage their money. Hamas leaders are multi-billionaires. So we're not talking about an organization, if you're looking at the sand around the beach, that's not the situation. We're talking about people who are super sophisticated. So it's not above their potential to actually short these funds.
Right. Now, as I said before, the report out of New York apparently made a basic mistake. Correct, thinking that Israeli stocks are traded in shekels. That they calculated figures rather than what's agarot, or basically like cents. So they basically times 100, saying that Hamas could have made billions. So that it was clearly not the case. Let's say that.
Right.
But again, they did find there was some apparently unusual trading, particularly in some stocks, perhaps even in Bank Leumi prior to
It's
October
Bank
7th.
Leumi, but it's also exchange-traded funds, which are like baskets of the biggest stocks. It consists of Elbit and Bank Leumi and the chemical companies. So we're talking about Israel's largest companies.
Right.
So you can buy these. They bought
ETFs, which, as you say, bundle together either stocks in an industry or maybe from a specific country, and some suspicious trading involved.
Very suspicious, because when you look at the chart, it looks like a tsunami. It was a period. I mean, Israel Stock Exchange did not perform well last year, so and now it's slightly improved. So, but if you look at these short positions are expensive, because I need you to lend me your shares in order to do this. So it's very expensive to hold you. We're talking about $1 billion in short positions. So it's a lot of money, but so it's very unusual, because if you look at the chart, if this is the time axis, you see very little activity and then boom.
Right.
If you do not time it correctly, I know people who went bankrupt on short positions. So they knew that the company would do badly. They did not know when. They went bankrupt because of the expense of holding such a position.
Right. And lastly, is there anything that could be done, either in this case to, I don't know about retrieve the money, or certainly to prevent this kind of thing? Aren't there some kind of safeguards in place?
Well, the U.S. has a prohibition against terrorist financing. So if they actually succeed, which they failed actually to do in the Osama bin Laden in the September 11, but if they can actually trace the money to Hamas, this would be considered money that finances terrorist activities, and it would be confiscated.
Right, and presumably, yeah.
But you know, it's interesting. This was written by law professors, not by finance professors. Yeah. It's fascinating because, you know, if it wasn't a terrorist organization, it was somebody who just had a friend who was in Hamas and did this, it's not illegal. It's not part of the insider trading laws in the United States. You know, we've talked in the studio before that doctors, lawyers, journalists sometimes have difficult moral roles to prepare to play out in situations like this because they're part of a system. That's not true in financial markets, and there's no reason somebody should be able to make money because they know a terrorist attack is going to happen.
It's going to occur, right?
Right. I mean, just, to argue, and people say, well, how could Hamas terrorists invest in the stock market? Of course, this would be done through third parties. We should note, relative to your comment, many of the top leaders of Hamas live in palatial villas in Doha, in Qatar, for example, mingling with the elite of that very wealthy nation. And it is quite possible someone connected in a periphery way may have acted on their behalf or be given information on their behalf.
They have legions of people who are financial experts in black economy. All these they have it, Russia has it. I mean, many countries do that. So there's no doubt that having so much money and having to keep it under the radar, they do have the sophistication, and I agree that it's appalling, the idea that somebody has information and benefits on that.
And appalling that money either may or may not end up somehow in the coffers of Hamas or some of his leadership. Well, that is certainly a disturbing thought. And we said making a killing in the market. Unfortunately, there's some room for more regulation clearly needed when it comes to this. A lot of people even question the value of shorting stocks.
Yes.
That's a discussion more for Bloomberg
That's
News
a philosophical.
than it is for I-24 News. Dr. Alex Coleman, thank you for joining us. Owen Alterman, our senior diplomatic correspondent, thank you for being with us on this special broadcast. But please do stay with us. I-24 News. This ends this particular broadcast, but I-24 News will continue its continuing coverage of Israel's war against Hamas, Day 59, coming to a close, coming up now to the 2-month point already of Israel's war against Hamas. Thanks for joining us.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Okay. This is yours. I am a big friend of the Jewish people in Israel.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
Good night and welcome to I24 News' ongoing coverage of Israel at war. I'm Ariel Levin-Waldman. Heavy fighting in the south of Gaza as Israeli forces move on Hamas's second key stronghold, the city of Khan Yunis. The Air Force performing preparatory bombardments, striking weapons stockpiles, rocket launchers, and other sites belonging to the Hamas terror organization. The IDF has declared the Salah ad-Din Highway, Gaza's main thoroughfare, a war zone and have instructed fleeing civilians to take alternative routes out of the theater of operations. Dozens of Israeli tanks have entered the South Gaza Strip today to encircle the city, where Hamas's senior leadership is believed to be bunkered, along with 137 remaining hostages seized during the October 7th onslaught. The Air Force said it has struck at least 200 Hamas targets overnight in preparation for today's ground movements. The operations continue in North Gaza as well. The IDF's Negev Brigade found extensive Hamas fortresses underneath a school in Beit Hanun. Also a morale victory. This video showing the IDF demolishing Hamas's main judicial offices, the latest symbol of Hamas's political control to fall. Fierce fighting still remains even in the north of the Strip, though. The Jabalia and Shajaiya neighborhoods are a network of ambush sites and strike tunnels that the IDF was working to surround and cut off before the temporary pause began. Now they must be taken after Hamas has had time to resupply and refortify those sectors. All day long, terror groups have fired rockets into Israel, including on Israel's center. That said, though, we are going to open with our eye in the north with mortar fire from across the border and the IDF hitting Hezbollah weapons depots in that region. Our correspondent Pia Steckelbach is live in northern Israel. Pia, give us the latest from the northern front.
Right, Ariel. Well, the skirmishes between Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and Israel are continuing. It seems like we are back to the situation as it was before the ceasefire, as the north here experienced some kind of calm during that week-long truce. Now, today we've seen several attacks coming out of southern Lebanon. The latest one was on Kiryat Shimon in the very eastern part of the Israel-Lebanon border. Rockets were reportedly launched in that area, all falling into open area, not causing any casualties there. But Kiryat Shimon is one of those areas that have have been evacuated way before the ceasefire even started. Kiryat Shmona is a city of more than 20,000 residents. Those residents, along with dozens of other border communities, those residents simply don't know when they will be able to go back to their houses. First and foremost, also because Hezbollah is a threat that existed before this current war with Gaza started, and that is expected to also persist when this war ends. Now, Hezbollah has time and time again made clear that they will make their full entry into this war dependent on what is going to happen in Gaza, but we see that they pick up their pace of activity. Today also attacks on the western side of the border on Shtula and Matat. We are also talking about the IDF, of course, retaliating as per protocol. Artillery fire, we could even hear some of that earlier this afternoon. Artillery fire and also airstrikes, as you mentioned, demolishing, according to an army statement, a weapons depot, and also targeting other Hezbollah targets, such as also a command center there in southern Lebanon. Now, today, throughout the day, we did not receive any reports of any casualties here on the Israeli side, but yesterday an anti-tank missile was launched towards the community of Bet Hillel, close to Kiryat Shmona, again at the eastern side of the Israel-Lebanon border, injuring 11 people, among them both civilians and soldiers. And Ariel, that really just shows you how volatile the situation here in the north is again, and how much tension there is.
Pia, I have to ask, though, what do we know about what's being discussed just north of the border? Is there media saying anything that gives us an insight into what Hezbollah is thinking or planning?
Right. Well, Ariel, Hezbollah has time and time been saying that they will make their full entry into this war depending on what is happening in Gaza. However, the northern front is very much open, is very much active, and I don't think that Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah himself, knows what his next step will be. Now, if Hezbollah wanted to join this war, the momentum might have already passed. We've been very much expecting that in the first phase of this war. Now, these skirmishes still seem to be somewhat contained. However, these skirmishes, these regular clashes, they do have massive ramifications both for the civilians on the southern Lebanese side and also for the Israeli civilians. And I think this is something, if we speak about the tensions that this is creating on the Israeli side, this is something that Hezbollah profits from. We speak about thousands of people here in the northern front that have evacuated their homes, and again, they do not know when to come back. And this is, of course, also part of the Israeli dialogue in terms of how the north will look like when the war in Gaza will be over.
Well, thank you very much, Pia, for that insight on what's going on the northern border. We are now going to change our attention to the southern border, though, where our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, is standing by in the south. Jonathan, walk us through the latest developments in the Gaza front today.
We're hearing heavy bombardments, both in the place where we are. Right behind us is the Gaza neighborhood of Jabalia. That's in Gaza City, but we're hearing and also seeing the heavy artillery pounded on the southern part of the Gaza Strip, mainly the city of Khan Yunis. Up until about 2 hours ago, the shelling was extremely heavy in both parts of the Gaza Strip. Seemed to have gone down a bit in the past hour or so, but still heavy bombardment, especially over in the area of Khan Yunis. Seems to be a preparation for a ground maneuver also in that part of Gaza.
Jonathan, one of the things that we're hearing from the IDF is in the area of 200 bombings daily. This is less than half of what we were hearing when they were talking about the air campaign in the north. Is there simply a lower concentration of targets in Khan Yunis, or is the military adopting a different strategy for that part of the operation?
A different strategy, that's one thing, and second, we are here, we can hear it from here and also see it, though it's a little bit far. There is a lot of activity in Khan Yunis, not so much maybe from the air, but heavy artillery being pounded on that city, the second largest city of the Gaza Strip, and I think there's quite an understanding that a ground incursion there is imminent, will be coming in the coming days. At least up until an hour ago, there was quite heavy bombardment in that area as well. So we can speak of quite a lot of activity in that area.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, for that update from the southern front. For further analysis on this, though, we are going to come to our studio. Sitting next to me here is Owen Alterman, our senior correspondent, as well as Eitan Dangut, former military secretary to 3 different ministers of defense, as well as former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories for the IDF. Eitan, I want to talk with you first. I want to know, what is the military strategy right now for Khan Yunis? Is it the same one we saw in the north, or is it different?
It can be the same, but it's the same goal, to control Khan Yunis, to make it impossible for Hamas to move, of course, freely, to destroy all the structures of Hamas inside Khan Yunis, to find out a lot of arsenal of arms that are still in the tunnels under the ground in houses, to identify all the command and control area in Tulkarem. Tulkarem is the capital of the south and the second important city for Hamas after the Gaza City. And as we estimate that most of Hamas leadership are there. Now, how to do it is something else, because you have the intelligence, you have the city of Khan Yunis is different than the area of the north of north of Gaza Strip. The area itself has been organized and prepared by Hamas in a different way. You have to surprise, you have to strike places that you know what is who is there, what is hidden there, what is the threat from there. So it's under a work in order, and it's complex that you are doing it with coordination of infantry, armor, engineering, by airstrike, artillery, where it can be without making any kind of threat to the soldiers. And by this, you came from the east side of Khan Yunis, and people know what they are doing. Be aware that southern to Khan Yunis, it's Rafah area, while more and more civilians were called a week, 2 weeks ago from Gaza to move there, Amwasi area that is outside of this kind of strikes. So you have to be more careful, but you have to make it with a lot of coordination, professionality, and be aware about the safe of the soldier's life. As I know for now, it's running on the direction with achievements. Not everything is published, and during such kind of combat and movement, you have to keep it not under not to publish it. So I think that taking Tulkarem is to take a center, the command of control Hamas. You are making another symbol of Hamas. It doesn't have the meaning that in this moment Hamas has destroyed, the goal has been achieved, but is not one step, I can call it 3 steps to climb up more over the goal.
Absolutely. And I want to point out to our audience that Khan Yunis is believed to be where Hamas's leadership is, as well as many of the 137 hostages that still remain. The families of those 137 hostages that are being held, by the way, in unspeakable conditions and enduring constant abuses by the tormentors, the families are demanding more action from Israel's government. They're voicing fury that their voices have been largely ignored, and telling Israel's leaders, if they don't act, the families will find another power that will. Let's take a listen.
We are facing a very difficult emotional situation where the heavy disaster, along with this ominous silence, has led 136 families to despair. We understand the escalation of the war due to the breach of the ceasefire by Hamas. We request a meeting with the War Cabinet to receive updates on the fate of our family members now, not tomorrow, now. If you don't have time for us, we will go to someone else and we will find the one who will represent us. Thank you very much.
And we are now going to our correspondent, Emily Francis, who is standing by at the military headquarters, the Kiryat, where the families are supposed to be meeting tomorrow with parts of the government and the military. Emily, walk us through exactly what the demands are and what's going on here.
Hi, Ariel. Well, listen, I mean, first of all, they had to, like you just played that soundbite just now from that press conference, I mean, they really had to raise hell to even be heard. They said they were humiliated and ignored for 3 days while these families were trying to get attention. Yes, I know we were able to rejoice at the return of some of those hostages, but they're still not getting what they need, and they are obviously demanding. In fact, a lot of the families, including 8 of the released hostages and 102 hostage families, issued an urgent appeal to the Red Cross ahead head coming to visit the area. But basically, they're saying the hostages are suffering illness, injury, criminal neglect, and every day that passes could be their last. They want proof of life. They want to secure immediate release. They have a whole list of demands, and especially a lot of those hostages that are still being held now, the men and also some of the women do have medical conditions. We have one we know that has colitis. We have another that has asthma and gets frequent kidney stones. So these are real medical needs that need to be met. I do want to say one silver lining from today is earlier we were live in Herzliya when Maya and Itai Regev returned. They were brother and sister that got separated when they were taken hostage. They reunited in the hospital. Maya needed to get a procedure done on her leg, but they were able to return home. So yes, there were people there cheering them on, throwing confetti, smiling, all of that, but this does not ignore the fact that this is still a long journey ahead. The families are angry, and rightly so. And again, even though we're seeing people are being released with maybe not too much physical repercussions, the psychological is a whole other story. In fact, the head of Schneider Children's Medical Center did speak earlier in a press conference talking about just from the questions and the things that some of the kids ask, simple things like, can I open the door? Something as small as that, which would be normal for them 70 days ago, obviously not the case. Here's more on some of the effects that these young people endured in captivity.
They looked like shadows of children, not like children. They looked like shadows. And children are just so strong that while we had them and we still have them during those days that they were with us, first you listen to them, you look at them, and they say almost nothing. Or they whisper, or they ask very quietly, can we look out the window? Can you imagine a child asking if he can look out the window? Can I open the drawer? It's your drawer, honey. It's yours. It's your bed. You can open any drawer. Can I go to the shower? Many of them have not showered since their kidnapping days, or have showered with a cold bucket if they were lucky. Can I go to the shower? Wow, there is warm water here. Can I walk out of the room? These are the kind of questions that we heard very silently during the first day.
Nightmarish situation. That was a report from our Emily Francis in the field. Discuss this more. We are going to return to studio. I'm going to turn to our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman. One of the things that we saw from the hostages who are enduring so much pain right now, these family members who don't know the fate of their loved ones, is the statement that if the Israeli government won't help them, they will turn to other powers that might. But who might that even be in this situation?
It's hard to say. Who else would have the kind of interest that we potentially aligned with them if not the Israeli government, right? I mean, they can go to foreign governments if their loved ones hold foreign passports and ask them to do more. But at the end of the day, Ariel, while we saw possibly a deal by the Thai government with someone or gestures of appreciation for Vladimir Putin, at the end of the day, it's really up to the Israeli government to balance with the cruel balance that needs to be struck, right, between the two goals of the war, winning the war proper against Hamas and bringing the hostages home. And of course, that vexing question, to say the least, isn't going away. One other important update, actually, from the past hour. Israel's Interior Minister, Moshe Arbel, making what must have been a very, very hard decision and saying that local elections, which had originally been planned for October 31st, then postponed for obvious reasons in the initial weeks of the war to the end of January, will actually be going forward on January 30th, that he is not going to delay the local elections further. Again, these are local elections up and down Israel for mayors and city councils, except, of course, in communities that have been evacuated, where for obvious reasons, the elections simply can't take place. And there, the elections will happen 5 months after people have returned to their homes. You can only imagine how hard of a decision this is, right? On one hand, to actually have election campaigns and signs and the stuff of elections in the middle of a war such as this one, again, where hostages are being held, right, in the tunnels of Gaza. And on the other hand, I think the imperative that democracy continue to function, right? We have a parliament that continues to function, a government that continues to function, an economy that largely continues to function, and the idea that democracy and elections need to continue to function too, and that it's time for voters to go back to the polls and to have a chance to elect their local representatives and not have their terms continually extended. At any rate, he held consultations, among others, with security officials and made, again, what must have been a very, very tough decision. It'll be interesting to see how the Israeli public responds, and of course, one would imagine that should circumstances unfortunately warrant, one would imagine he would potentially have to delay the elections again, but at least sitting here on December 4th, right? Just under 2 months to go until the scheduled date. Green light for local elections up and down most of Israel.
Yeah, it shows the importance of returning society to some sense of normalcy, but ultimately to get back to true normalcy, the war has to be won. And for that, I do want to turn back to Eitan, still with us in studio, because we are focusing on how that war is being won. And we had been talking a little bit about what lies ahead in Khan Yunis. You had said it is going to be different from the fighting, requiring some slightly different strategy than what we saw in northern Gaza. Why is that? What's different about Hamas's fortifications and setup there?
I think that the area is different geographically. It's a little bit more open space. There is space from the east towards the west. When you are going to Khan Yunis city, it's crowded city, half million people. But when you are maneuvering to this area, you are crossing what we call the area of the central part of Gaza, the location of 3 refugees camp, what was called Nusrat, Muazi, Burej, and then you have another open area, a villages area, let's call it like this, and then Dir el-Balah, and then you are coming to Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis has importance because it's very close also to the west side, to the near the Mediterranean. It has very close distance to Rafah area, and we have to remember that between Rafah and Khan Yunis are locating hundreds, thousands of people that came from the north, and what was there 1.5 weeks ago, and there is a kind of a way that you have to maneuver to reach the goal of taking Khan Yunis, to kill as you can and destroy much more the structure of the terrorists of Hamas, their leadership, that according to rumors there are a lot, and you can estimate that there are a lot. By the way, the underground tunnels is not still, we cannot say that it's under control of Israel. It's not under the control of Israel. Even in my estimation, there is tunnels that are running from Khan Yunis till Gaza City. That's the way they are doing. And probably, and you were very right when you mentioned the issue of the hostages, the kidnappers, people that are there, and they are not holding together, and you have to collect intelligence, and to, according all this operation, the IDF was very sensitive to get foreign intelligence about pointing where there can be possibility of hostages that are holding, and even underground. So everything is influence you, besides the fact that during the change of the situation in the field, you have a real-time intelligence. So you cannot use it a new strategy for reaching the goal. The new thing is the way that the IDF is planning how to reach it, how to attack, and how to come. And you have also, it's very important to take care on the safe of the soldier's life, and how to do it with kind of patient, kind of be very direct to where you are running concerning your targets, and you have to think about the next step. The next step, that even to evacuate people that were asked to move, civilian. Basically, there are thousands who are living only when they hear the noise of the movement of the IDF armed ground forces, etc. And I may tell you that there are rumors about targeting vehicles that we can identify, that probably there is a chance that people from the leadership of Hamas will try to escape. Now where is the next station can be? Towards Rafah, towards Egypt. It means that it runs. But if you would like, and we have a little bit more time, we can speak also about the north part of Gaza, because what is the combat and the war now around Jabalia and Sachaya has a lot of importance in completing the mission, that to take all the north part of Gaza from the central part in a way that the armed ground forces can be everywhere from that moment. And it means we are now in a fight with the last 3 main battalions of this region that are symbols. The symbols of Sajaiya has a lot of memories that they killed Israeli soldiers with anti-tank missile in 2014 from Golani Brigade, and it's something that we didn't forget. And we have Sajaiya was waiting to the IDF. Now I can tell it at the beginning of the war, while we surprised, instead coming from the east side, we moved towards the west and began all this attack from the west, moving from south to north and surround Gaza. And the brave and the way of the soldiers that are fighting, for me, and these evenings before, now, and after, is the real story of the Israeli generation that is fighting for its independence. Really, I sit here in the studio. I don't care what you are reporting about the political level, the statements that are very low level sometimes, and other things. This is the real Israel. The spirit, the mood, and the willing to make the correction to save the country. It's to save the country for existence war that if we are not succeed now, it will be very soon in a different places. And this is also a way to pay the attention of Hezbollah, Iran, and other kind of proxies who are looking on the IDF and bring them the message of the strongest of the IDF, not only by the air, but by the ground, and to make proof and to make the step. When you are on the ground, you can make the flag. The flag is a symbol for the way we are. And for the political level, it giving the green card to continue and to speed up, and we have time, we are not there yet, the procedure for the day after that will be started very soon.
Eitan, I wanted to actually ask you a question loosely related to these, because of your experience as coordinator of government activities in the territories, the issue of humanitarian aid, which has been a huge issue abroad, and obviously a very, very important issue to the Biden administration, calling, even just over the last few hours, for more fuel, even more fuel than was going in during the pause, to be going into the Gaza Strip. Antony Blinken not only talked about the basics of life, but restocking store shelves with commercial goods. If you were sitting at the table as Kogat, advising the chief of staff or advising the political echelon, what would your advice be to do on this issue of humanitarian aid?
First of all, I would wait. Now, that everything will not be under lack of food and water and the needs of the main part, the majority of the population very close to Gaza, and the entrance from Rafah is working. I may tell you that in the ceasefire, in my opinion, underground tunnels that Hamas get much more than it's needed there. They have enough food, fuel, water to continue the devil activities from the underground. They are not caring for their population. What I would suggest at such circumstances is, of course, to continue in our principles in a human being to supply what is needed to the population, but now we can wait with fuel to the area of Khan Yunis, for the area of the north. Now is the time of war again. I remind you, there is hostages, there are kidnappers there. We demand that they will be released first before Sinwar will drink fuel because he has enough.
And we're going to continue this discussion in a few minutes. That said, we are just about out of time until our break. We will be back in just 3 minutes, so stay with us. We're going to be covering this and so much more as soon as we get back, which is only 3 minutes away.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, espadas de hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
Thank you for staying with us. America's State Department spokesman Matthew Miller has made a very chilling statement that Hamas refused to release more women, thus ending the ceasefire, because they don't want the world to know what they have done to the victims.
We've obviously seen the reports that Hamas has committed sexual violence, they've committed rape. We have no reason at all to doubt those reports. When you look at all of the atrocities that Hamas carried out on October 7th and the atrocities that they have carried out since, the fact that they continue to hold women hostages, the fact that they continue to hold children hostages, the fact that it seems one of the reasons they don't want to turn women over that they've been holding hostage, and the reason this pause fell apart, is they don't want those women to be able to talk about what happened to them during their time in custody. Certainly, there is very little that I would put beyond Hamas when it comes to its treatment of civilians, and particularly its treatment of women.
And despite the well-documented evidence of Hamas's sadistic crimes against humanity, it took nearly 2 months since then before the United Nations Women's Welfare Watchdog Office even issued the most tepid of statements criticizing the brutality. Our U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim was at the UN headquarters in New York, where a furious public demanded the international body be held to account for its rank hypocrisy.
Israeli and American Jewish women and their supporters say enough is enough. Enough of the UN remaining silent in the face of mounting evidence of rape and sexual assault carried out by Hamas in its October 7th massacre in Israel. Here at the United Nations today, a protest held outside the building this morning in which the head of the government commission charged with compiling evidence of those atrocities spoke out.
The deafening silence raises the haunting questions. Are Israeli women protected under international law? No. Are Israeli women even human? I will not stand by to see the destruction of everything we as women, as human beings, as human rights activists have fought so hard for. We will not let them take it away from us. Women's rights exist beyond any law. No one can grant them and no one can take them away.
Later on, here inside the United Nations, an overflow crowd taking part in an event put on by the Israeli mission to the UN called Hear Our Voices. A number of prominent speakers, including tech executive and entrepreneur Sheryl Sandberg.
The world has to decide who to believe. Do we believe the Hamas spokesperson who said that rape is forbidden, therefore it couldn't have possibly happened on October 7th? Or do we believe the women whose bodies tell us how they spent the last minutes of their lives? Who are we going to believe?
Several of the speakers today nearly brought to tears, remembering the evidence that they've seen of the atrocities committed against women on October 7th, including New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. She got a standing ovation from the overflow crowd when she called out the United Nations for their silence in the face of the evidence of those crimes. We spoke afterwards off camera with Sheryl Sandberg. I asked her why this event today, of all the things you could be doing. She said there was nothing more important than coming out today. In fact, she said, she pointed to her daughters and nieces that she brought along with. I said, is this something special or do you normally bring them to work? She said, no, this is a special occasion. She wants them raised in a world where their voices matter. She pointed to the UN flags down the hall and said most of these countries are led by men. It's going to take more women speaking out to make sure that what happened on October 7th is labeled as a crime against humanity. Reporting here from the UN, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
And while the international community might be silent, witnesses are not, recounting the nightmarish visions they saw on that day. In that venue, we are bringing some of that testimony to you now, that of Natalie Sanandaji, a survivor of the Nova Festival massacre. Natalie, I hate to even bring this as the first question, but given everything we've just heard and all the denial that we're seeing, can you recount for us what you witnessed that day?
On that day of October 7th, other than witnessing the rockets being intercepted overhead and hearing the shooting coming from behind me because we were being pursued, I had to witness people that I knew at the party getting shot down, friends that made a slightly different decision than I did when they were running, later finding out that they didn't survive and weren't as fortunate as I was to have made it out alive. As time is going on, even though we're getting further and further away from what happened on that day, it honestly only hurts more and more because every day I'm just hearing new stories of what people witnessed, what people went through on October 7th, and stories of what these hostages have been going through since then. And with every story that's coming out from every hostage that's being released, it just makes me more and more worried for the people who are still there and what they're going through on a daily basis. While we're here and fighting a different fight, while we're here and trying to fight the fight of spreading the truth, they're still there and they're still truly fighting for their lives. I don't even want to imagine what most of them are going through.
Since then, you've made it a personal mission to tell the stories and to confront deniers in the Western world that would try to equivocate or undermine the truth of what happened. I understand that you are in Germany right now making this sort of statement, making this sort of speech. Tell me what you've encountered in Germany and in other places in the West that you have tried to present this story.
Honestly, so far, most of my encounters face-to-face with people who hear my story are very positive ones. It's people showing support, people who are in their own way also spreading the truth and spreading my story after they hear it. I do feel that for some people, it takes hearing the story from someone who was there to really care about it more. And I've seen a lot of positive responses from world leaders, from leaders in the US. So that gives me a little bit of hope, because really the thing I can hope for the most is that this will never happen again, that the world will not let this happen again to the Jewish people. But obviously online, I'm not seeing a lot of positivity. Obviously online, when I see my interviews being posted, I see so much hate, I see so much negativity, I see so much denial, I see people justifying the killing of Jews simply because they are Jewish, and it's very grim and upsetting to see.
You talk about this being online. Do you believe that these naysayers, the anti-Semites, the liars, the equivocators, do they have any real power, or are they simply voices on the internet, and next to that, the impact that you're having is going to eclipse that?
I don't know how much power I would want to give them. I do think the power lies in the school system, and a lot of what's happening online, I'm seeing that it's a lot of the younger generation, for the most part, who seems to be misinformed and confused to what the conflict is actually about. And a lot of that is because of the school system. So I wouldn't necessarily say these people online with all of their comments have that much power. Obviously, when they come to the streets, and obviously when they threaten the lives of Jewish people every day out on school campuses and just in public settings in general, yes, that does mean that they have a power, and that they're instilling fear in another group of people, so they do, in a sense, have a power. But it's good to see that the people that I've been speaking to who are in actual places of power, whether it's in the government or on news channels, that they seem to be on the side of humanity, and that's what's most important.
Well, I'm optimistic that you are correct, and that the most of people out there are, as you said, on the side of humanity. Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your story, as hard as it is to do so, but it is a story the world needs to hear.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to turn now back to the studio, where we have with us now still our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, as well as Eitan Dango, the former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories with the IDF. I want to open with you, Owen, because as we saw with Natalie's story, activism being done around the world to ensure that Western leaders understand the importance of this fight. But at the same time, the younger voting population in many of these Western countries, while the leaders have our back, that doesn't mean that their youngest voters do as well.
Yeah, it's a particular issue in the United States, where even before the war, there was a huge gap, right, looking at generations between older voters and younger voters, and the issue of Israel. Even bigger, Ariel, I think, than the partisan gap, right? There's a lot that has been made over the last 20 years about the gap in terms of Democrats and Republicans. But at least in the last years, what the story that's really emerged is the generation gap between older and younger voters. And obviously that's a concern for Israel, a longer term concern, and a concern that predated October 7th, but nonetheless, obviously a concern. There are no easy solutions to it. There's certainly no immediate solutions. This is going to take, it had already taken, again, before the war, a lot of long-term thinking about what to do, but certainly efforts to explain and describe, even if it's difficult for the survivors, what they went through on October 7th is fundamentally important for Israel to present its cause, for Israelis to defend their own humanity against attacks on it, attacks by silence, such as the UN Women's Organization that we talked about with Mike earlier on and earlier on in our broadcast. It's fundamentally important, and it's good to see eloquent survivors being willing to take the brave step of having to recount what they went through in order to tell the world.
And it's not just the voices online, though. They have effect because they put pressure on the leaders of these countries. They vote as well. And for the United States, Israel's main backer, this is going to be a very serious pressure point, especially with the way that America is largely trying to tell Israel how to fight the war.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Although, again, I think even if its support has become more complicated and maybe a bit more conditional, I think we can't escape the fact that the Biden administration has been extremely supportive, right? And nothing will erase those speeches of the first week. Nothing ever. As Michael Oren, I know a frequent guest on I-24 News, and again, former ambassador, Israeli ambassador to the United States, maybe the biggest expert on planet Earth, academic expert in the U.S.-Israel relationship, as he said, this is a speech that will never be forgotten by our people. So the Biden administration has been very supportive, but yes, trends within American society and the generational gap was a serious problem already before the war, and argues has become an even more serious problem as some attitudes, unfortunately, have been cemented by events over the course of the war. And obviously, it's a big long-term challenge for Israel. And I'm not sure that there's a ready solution or even any solution. And yes, in the long term, that will inevitably have an impact on Israel's foreign policy and Israel's national security strategy. Again, I guess the only thing I can say is Israel has to go strong on explaining that it isn't only about pictures from Gaza. It's about a geopolitical competition between the United States on one hand, China, maybe, and Russia on the other, and that this war is a part of that. In the same way that the war in Ukraine is, in just the same way that the struggle over Taiwan is, and to try to win the political center in the United States that way. And as I've said before, one way to do that is by changing Israel's policy on the war in Ukraine.
Absolutely. And, I want to turn back to Eitan. One of the things that Owen was pointing out, actions do speak a lot louder than words. And while the United States, at least verbally, seems to be putting stipulations on how Israel fights the war, we also see the direct material aid the United States giving Israel is far more than we've seen in past conflicts or in past fights. I want to actually talk to you about one of the line items we saw on one of the arms transfers from the United States. That includes a 2,000-pound deep ground penetrating bunker buster, something that Israel did not have in its arsenal before. Is this actually going to finally be a game changer in the fight against Hamas?
It will be a very important type of arm that is supplied to the Air Force. It will help a lot to succeed, to enter to a very important places in the underground that the IDF decide that these are the targets we are looking for. And it will create, I believe, the kind of closing the circle inside the tunnels, lose of self-confidence of those who are hidden there. There are other things that are done also by IDF, other type or other kind of opportunities we are trying. I don't say that the result has not been a period, but it will help a lot in order to achieve, because the underground tunnel is now the main thing that Hamas based its survival in what's going in outside and up to where they are hidden there. And I say again, we have to be very sensitive, very careful. We don't have to forget that our two main missions is the urgent one is to release the hostages. Hamas is refusing to release 139, if I'm not mistaken, hostages, 37 that are still kept by them. It's many. It's too much days. As the stories are coming, it's not the stories, what the people there face, those who were released, and telling after what happened inside Israel is just continuating of the picture, of the evidence, of the truth that we are trying to tell to the world. These organizations are butchers. There is not any characteristic of pitiness and human respect to people who are there, from babies to elders, women, etc. We have to save them. So we have to take an account. It's a lot to combine. The combination is very, very sensitive. Now, the way that we are maneuvering are pressing more Hamas. I really even hope that Hamas will ask to stop by agree to release, because they are not agreed that the Red Cross will see them. The Red Cross are not showing any kind of ambitions and motivations to demand it. I didn't hear it. Even today, you hear that the Secretary General of the United Nations that were the first days was a shame the way he speak about what happened. Again today, pointing the issue of the humanitarian issue as the request from Israel, even though he hears what's going, instead of coming loudly to demand, as the United States spokesman stand, you show in the White House, and say the terrible things that happened to women in the United Nations, they didn't get the news. Maybe they don't have any kind of outside connection to get what is reporting from Israel or from the White House that is very close to them.
It's definitely a challenge for everything, not just operationally, but also the practical and the international considerations. I want to thank both of you for explaining everything that's going on, both the military angle as well as the diplomatic and the political angles that we're all looking like. That said, we have a lot more here, and that's despite all the tales that we've heard of horror from October 7th. There were also tales of heroism and survival, some more unlikely than others, such as one tale, a 97-year-old woman's tale of evasion and escape.
Today's newspaper has arrived.
Here, more hostages have been released. It's all from the party at Reim. He wasn't at the Reim party at all.
No, he was at home.
Itai is in Gaza?
Yes.
He might get lucky.
Right. Let's hope he gets lucky.
את יודעת כל מה שקורה עכשיו אצלנו?
Tough questions if I know. Everything gets mixed up. What can I do?
It's been 8 weeks since she was brought here on the Black Sabbath. She sits in fake tranquility in the home of one of her children in Kochav Yair, grieving over the destruction of the kibbutz and the death of her loved ones. Grandma Aviva has only one hope left: to celebrate a birthday next month with her grandson Itai, who is a prisoner of Hamas.
You have to tell me what you will ask me, how old I am. I think I'm 97 years old. I don't believe it either. I was born in 1927. Do the math. I think that it's true.
Yes, soon.
I have no complaints about my age. I have no complaints. Not about the health, not even about the mind.
It's hard for the mind to contain everything. What happened to Aviva that Saturday? How did she manage to get out on her own from the Be'eri massacre?
I remember Arabs came. They said it was actually their house. I told them, welcome, come visit. Come visit. I thought we could talk to them, but they were by my balcony. I know that, sure. But what happened then, I no longer remember. Well, that's history.
The truth is that Mom remembers it, but Gracie, the nanny, was there.
At our house?
Yes.
Gracie, the devoted caregiver. She even managed to send a picture of herself in Aviva, cuddled under the blanket in the safe room, until her last post, "Help, people are entering the house."
At around 12, she wrote for the first time that the terrorists have entered.
10 to 3?
This is her last message.
And at some point, Gracie disappeared and was murdered.
The full picture was completely by the family members, eyewitnesses who survived to tell their story.
They say that Mother's house, the balcony, was the war room, and all year long, Mother was actually their ops room, full of weapons, and that's where their activity was concentrated.
And where was Mom at the time?
On the swing. That's what they say, that Mom was on the swing on the porch. A plate full of fruit was placed in front of her, which Gracie, the nanny, must have prepared for her.
To the war room that opened on Aviva's balcony, the terrorists brought more people from the kibbutz. Some were kidnapped later, some injured, like a kibbutz member who arrived there seriously injured with their 2 remaining children.
This woman is Mother's neighbor, and she herself, her husband was murdered, and her baby was murdered, and brought her there. She says that thanks to Mom she survived, because Mom kept talking to her, and that's how she didn't lose consciousness. She also says that her son vomited all the time, because he inhaled a lot of smoke, and she told him, "It's okay, everything is fine." She also said that the mother kept talking, and they kept telling her to shut up, but she talked.
I hear. I'm listening.
Nothing ringing?
This is what we were told about you. People who were with you.
What? You're a hero and you don't even remember?
Probably the bad things I don't remember.
Memory is deceptive. The fog of the senses and forgetfulness probably leaves the bar of consciousness only with what the soul can bear.
I only remember one thing about myself, and I can't believe it was like that. I decided I was going, that I was leaving the kibbutz.
Aviva decided to go, walking slowly, alone, from her house toward the parking lot, with the walker, without the glasses and without a hearing aid. She remembers complete silence. But when she's in a bubble of silence from around the fighting at its peak,
There were still many terrorists in the kibbutz. There were many battles. It was 5:30 in the afternoon.
Fortunately for me, there was a ride, and I got on this ride. And he was on his way to Tel Aviv, and on the way, I called my daughter.
She didn't agree to go until she knew where Orit was. She asked what happened to Gracie. She said, "How can it be that I went without her?"
10 days later, they got bitter news. Orit, Aviva's daughter, and son-in-law Rafi were murdered. Their son, Itai, the grandson who came to visit Aviva, was taken hostage to Gaza.
It's okay. It's just I can't hide it. This is our family truth. Grandma knows it, that both parents were murdered, each in his own home, and that Itai was kidnapped. We actually talked about it. They talk about it every day. There are 3 of us left, out of a family of 6.
Mirav, Itai's sister, the only one from the family who doesn't live in the south, received the first sign of life in recent days through one of the hostages who was released. Save me now.
He wants to tell me that he is alive and that he asks us to do what is necessary to get him out. And today we know that he was simply taken when he knows that Mom, he saw her murdered in front of his eyes. He doesn't know what happened to my father because the connection went out 15 minutes earlier.
He is just sensitive and gentle, and we take great care of him. It's very hard to think about him there. And now that we know for a fact that the fighting continues, it is unbearable. Because he's 38 years old and without children, he is suddenly without rights. A person who is in what could be the prime of his life, currently becoming the bottom of the list. Now if he has no children, but I have children who need their uncle.
They haven't talked about the men yet. It's like it's not something that... Is it perhaps a victim of the war?
Should I tell you about Itai? A handsome, smart, and kind-hearted guy.
The thing that was most important to him was coming to visit you.
Yes?
Always. For him, the most important was being at Grandma's.
Last Friday, Aviva decided for the first time to leave the protected house in Kohav Yair. With her measured steps, she walked to the hostages' square in Tel Aviv.
When did you put the picture of Itai?
We placed it now. We organized it.
As a child, I remember we were always in the shadow of events. But here it comes in this way at such an old age, in a much more brutal way even. I must be optimistic. We have no other choice. This is our place.
You know, I tell the kids, I promise them, that what happened will never happen again, so that they have faith that it's possible to live here.
That's right, because when you go through something like that, it's really hard to believe.
And we do have an update on one of our stories, that of the families of 137 hostages remaining in Gaza, demanding to meet with the government. We do now know that as of 1:30 tomorrow, they will meet with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to make their case. And of course, we're going to be having that for you tomorrow. So definitely stay tuned for that broadcast in the future. That said, we are about to go on a break for now, but we're going to be back in just 3 minutes. So stay with us. We've got so much more coming up. We'll be right back.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Thank you all for staying with us as we continue our coverage of Israel at war. We're going to open this hour with our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, who is standing by in Israel South to bring us the latest developments going on with the war in the Gaza Strip.
Yes, Ariel, so heavy bombardment throughout the evening all along the Gaza Strip, especially in the southern part, the city of Khan Yunis, the second largest city in the Gaza Strip, but the largest one in the southern part. And this is where Israel believes the Hamas leadership is. This is where Israel believes many of the hostages might be. And I think this is the place where Israel will go with its ground maneuver next in the coming days. This is how it begins, usually with heavy shelling from the air with artillery, followed by a ground incursion.
Now, our live visuals there show something burning behind you. Do you have any idea what exactly just hit there?
But we know that Israel is striking all the time. We're not exactly sure what's going on, but there's heavy bombardment at all times, and this could be just another shelling coming from the Israeli side.
And Jonathan, within the last hours, we're hearing that telecoms say that communications networks across Gaza are down again. We usually saw this just at the beginning of major ground troop activity. Is that a sign that Khan Yunis is now going to be the subject of some massive ground operations rather than an air campaign?
I would say yes. We saw the communications going down when the first stage of the ground incursion began. This could possibly hint the beginning of the next round.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. We will be back with you as that situation develops. But we are going to look first at not the situation today, but what the day after might look like. The day after is yet to dawn on Gaza, but there's been speculation for weeks what that might actually look like. Senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman gave us a quick outline of the possible directions.
Before the day after in Gaza, the day itself has to end. But if the war in fact drives Hamas out of power, then 3 different types of regime could rule the Strip.
We have said that any security responsibility that they take on because of the military operation in Gaza needs to be temporary.
The first, reoccupation by Israel, with Israel governing 2 million Gazans, seen by almost all as a bad outcome, but still the default. If the war ends with Israel in control, then Israel would need to find a taker to replace it. Fail to find someone, and Israel would be stuck.
In defining that future, in shaping that future for Gaza, for the West Bank, and ultimately for a Palestinian state, Palestinian voices have to be at the center of that.
And so the second option, Palestinians governing Gaza. Either the Palestinian Authority, a revitalized Palestinian Authority, or some other structure run by Palestinians. In Washington and beyond, seen as the better choice. A skeptical Israel will try for deep change in Palestinian education and policies toward terrorism.
We will do everything to ensure that Gaza does not return to pose a threat to Israel, and that there is no element in it that educates its children in terrorism.
And then the third option, an international force, enticing, say, Saudi Arabia or the UAE to take on influence in Gaza, to show goodwill to the Arab world, and to project power against Iran. The outside actor could work through a Palestinian Authority it sponsors, showing options can be mixed and matched to find something key players can rally around.
And for more on this, we are joined by Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst. Thank you very much, Dan, for being in studio with us to break this down. We heard some of the possibilities of who's going to be in charge, but how many of these are actually realistic?
Well, I think the mix and match option is the most realistic, as Owen mentioned at the end. Israel doesn't have a good option in Gaza. A war as devastating as it has carried out is not a good option. Leaving Hamas in power in Gaza is not a good option. Israel has to choose the least bad option. Human beings are not wired for that very well, you know? You give them the least bad option and they tend to say, well, it's bad. But I urge you, if you're given a choice between syphilis and pancreatic cancer, you should choose syphilis. And if I look at which of these options is not the pancreatic cancer, I think it may be the Palestinian Authority. Now, the Palestinian Authority needs to be rejuvenated. There's a lot of things wrong with the Palestinian Authority. For one thing, it doesn't have the support of the people, even in the West Bank. It's seen as corrupt and ossified and so forth. For another thing, it's engaged in policies that are no longer really that tolerable to Israel, both on the education and on the so-called pay to slay, the payments to the families of terrorists. Now you can argue about who's a terrorist, but it needs a sprucing up. But I don't think that sprucing up is impossible to contemplate. And the idea of a rejuvenated Palestinian Authority, well-funded and with oversight both by Israel and by the Arab League, with the Arab League giving its stamp of approval to such a day after, might be the way to go. And let's just agree, it's better than being run by a maniacal, fundamentalist, jihadi, Iranian-backed mafia.
I mean, the big question is who is going to actually be willing to make changes in the Palestinian Authority to make it more palatable to all involved when they've resisted changes for decades. And as you describe it, they need to be a little less syphilitic.
Actually, yes. I don't know if it's syphilitic or cancerous, but I think we understand each other. Look, Mahmoud Abbas is very elderly, and he himself does not have a day after plan. But it's been contemplated. There are younger, more dynamic, and more credible people in the Palestinian Authority. Mohammed Dahlan, over in the Gulf might be a factor, in Gaza the day after, as indeed he once had been the day before. You'll hear pressure on Israel to release Marwan Barghouti, who is extremely popular, albeit a convicted terrorist, but also previously, before that, once upon a time, a man of peace. There are options, and none of them are great. Some of them are palatable. All of them are better than leaving Hamas in power in Gaza.
People like Barghouti, like Dahlan, does Israel have a lever of control over these people to prevent them from just becoming the next Yahya Sinwar?
I don't think Dahlan wants to become next Yahya Sinwar. None of them are jihadi Islamic fundamentalists. Might they become a standard issue Middle Eastern dictator? Perhaps. Would Israel be so opposed to that? I'm not so sure. Is that something I would necessarily advise? Also not. I would like to see the Palestinians be given a chance to turn Gaza into Singapore, not Somalia. It's a bit of a cliche. It's been said before. Maybe this time it can be done better. Maybe through the good services, or let's just say the middling services of the Arab League. They have a chance to step up, and I assess that the horror in Gaza. Israelis tend to look away from what's going on, but it is a horror. I think it is a wake-up call. They want a new alignment with Israel, the moderate Sunni nations. They see this is getting in the way. They'd like to make it go away. They don't want to personally pay a price. But a financial price, as opposed to the other ways in which one can pay a price, I think is on the table.
Well, let's hope there is something at the end of that road that might break decades of bloodshed and seemingly intractable conflict.
We crossed the Rubicon here in a way that Israel has to get rid of Hamas now. I think the Arabs have to do things differently as well.
Let's see how that develops going forward. But again, the day after is not going to be until the day after. We're going to continue this discussion in a moment. That's because this is still in the middle of an active war. The return of fighting in Gaza coming with the resumption of a daily death toll for the IDF troops in combat there. Combat casualties have now reached 74 after 3 more were announced today. They are Sergeant Major Neria Shire, Sergeant First Class Ben Zussman, and Sergeant Benjamin Yoshua Niram. Authorities also confirmed the death of Yonatan Samarno, killed at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. His body is still held in Gaza. Some of those funerals were today, along with that of Colonel Asaf Hamami, who was also killed on October 7th, whose death was announced over the weekend. Hamami was commander of the Gaza Division's Southern Brigade and the senior IDF officer taken by Hamas. Although his body also remains in Gaza, his funeral was held today at Tel Aviv's Kiryat Shaul Cemetery with thousands of people in attendance. Here's what his wife and mother had to say there.
At 6:30 in the morning, I woke up from the sirens in complete shock. Something didn't make sense to me. Nothing made sense that day. I sent you a message about picking up our son Alon, but you already were not answering. At this time, together with Tomer and Kirill, the 2 brave, heroic soldiers, you had already gone into battle. I know how much responsibility was placed on your shoulders. The burden of responsibility is what motivated you. It filled you, and it filled me.
You were always the first to leave as the last of the fighters on every occasion. Stone throwing or false alarm. With your own hands, you uprooted every herb that grew and blocked. You cleaned and repaired every fence and wall. Because the truth is that your job is to protect the residents so that they can live happily anywhere. Asaf, my beloved son, the light that you spread cannot be extinguished. The spirit you had and the good you did and that you spread will not be stopped.
And tensions are rising in the Red Sea as Yemen's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels target commercial ships claimed to have any ties to Israel. Denying the allegations, Israel accuses the Houthis of jeopardizing regional navigation. The Pentagon reports multiple attacks on vessels from 14 countries, highlighting the broader implications. As the U.S. is considering responses, concerns are mounting over escalating maritime unrest off of Yemen's coast, which threatens vital trade routes.
Yemen's Houthis are escalating attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, raising concern for the safety of key trade routes.
The naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces, with the help of Allah Almighty,
carried out this morning a targeting operation against 2 Israeli ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The targeted ships were the Unity Explorer and ship number 9. The first ship was targeted with a naval missile, and the second ship was targeted with a naval drone.
The Iranian-backed militia said attacks like those on Sunday would continue until Israel ends its strikes on Gaza. But the IDF denied the ships had any connection to Israel and accused the Houthis of endangering the freedom of navigation in the region.
One of the ships was damaged in a very serious way, and it seems that it could be in danger of sinking, and other one was lightly damaged. This is an event stemming from negative sabotage of the Houthis. We need to see how the world will answer this issue.
The Pentagon said a total of 3 commercial vessels connected to 14 separate countries were attacked in 4 incidents in the southern Red Sea from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. The Bahamas-flagged Unity Explorer bulk carrier was attacked in the morning and then again in the afternoon by anti-ship missiles. Then, the Panamanian-flagged number 9 reported damage but no casualties caused by a missile from Yemen. A third ship, the Sophie II, which also sails under Panama's flag, said it was struck as well but suffered no significant harm. A U.S. warship operating in the area assisted the commercial vessels by shooting down 3 drones, while the Pentagon accused Iran of enabling the Houthis' attacks.
This is also one of those allegations aimed at projections, which are made in line with efforts to deviate public opinion of nations and to cover up crimes by the Zionist regime and the U.S. government.
The U.S. says it will consider all appropriate responses in full coordination with its international partners. But in the absence of significant action, such attacks off the coast of Yemen will only increase in frequency and severity.
And for more on this, we are joined by Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, it's good to have you with us. Real question. The Houthis are clearly being massively emboldened here. How strong are they? How big of a threat are they?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Listen, the Houthis actually have the capability to act on a threat that they mentioned as early as 2017, which is their willingness to enter a conflict between either the Israelis and the Palestinians or Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah. As of 2017, the Houthis became the first proxy of Iran to have land attack cruise missiles. As of 2019, the Houthis became the first proxy of Iran to have medium-range ballistic missiles, meaning over 1,000 kilometers. And as you saw with the drones that have between 1,800 to 2,500 kilometer ranges, they also have suicide drones as well. When you level on top of that the Houthis are the only proxy of Iran to have both paraded and used anti-ship ballistic missiles rather than just anti-ship cruise missiles, this means they're a lethal, potent proxy that the Islamic Republic is slowly bringing online now, not just against Israel, but against commercial vessels and shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb and Red Sea, to be able to replicate the strategy that Iran has so long perfected between the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz.
Behnam, if they are attacking international shipping, this puts them directly within the remit of the United States Navy to protect international shipping. They are on a collision course with the most powerful military on Earth if they do that.
One would think that, but the chips are aligning slightly differently, both in the eyes of the patron, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the proxy, which are the Houthis in Yemen. But this kind of mentality is congealing in the minds of the Iran-backed proxies in Lebanon, such as Lebanese Hezbollah, which basically runs most of that state, as well as the Assad regime in Syria, but most importantly, the militias that go between Iraq and Syria. Essentially, this coalition of forces called the Axis of Resistance believes America is on the way out. And regardless of Task Force 151 or all these other NAVCENT and CENTCOM task forces that exist within the CENTCOM area of operations, these guys believe that they can do a death by 1,000 cut strategy against the U.S. force presence in the region, to evict it from the region, and to have a freer hand against Iran's adversaries in the region, be it the pro-America moderate Sunni bloc in the region, like Saudi Arabia, as well as you know, against the Israelis. So their goal here is death by 1,000 cuts, and the fact that they have not been hit back directly, meaning the Houthis in Yemen, will only underwrite the next batch of escalation, most unfortunately.
Well, does that mean that the international community must act sooner rather than later, and will they?
Indeed, they must. There is already a robust architecture in place in the region, but we need more of it. And that architecture is a more integrated air and missile defense architecture, both on land and at sea, for U.S. forces and coalition or partner forces in the region to be able to track, detect, defeat, and destroy the entire spectrum of Iran-backed aerial threats, be it rockets, mortars, drones, cruise missiles, or ballistic missiles. But that is all deterrence by denial. We need deterrence by punishment, a response to the point of origin for many of these strikes. And until that happens, we won't be able to change the minds of both patron and proxy.
But despite that, no military forces fighting in the area, particularly in Yemen, have managed to uproot the Houthis yet. That does not bode well for more interventions.
It does not bode well for more interventions. There is much more the U.S. can do in terms of force protection for its own assets, which rushed in the most recent case that you led with today about the attacks on commercial and maritime shipping. We've seen this several times in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz as well. There are ways to take out coastal defenses. There are ways to go after depots. But make no mistake, we're in a critical time right now. Washington needs to make sure it has the political will, military capability, and legal authority to make sure that it can continue to carry out these strikes over time.
Unchecked, the Houthis certainly have the capabilities to cut off global shipping, particularly oil trade. Do they have the ambition to do so?
Listen, you've even had Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps folks talk about as early as 2018, 2019, precisely using the Houthis to replicate that strategy that the Islamic Republic has against oil exports and the free flow of traffic across the Strait of Hormuz and Persian Gulf. So it would be no surprise to me if the Houthis choose to escalate their shipping. But one reason that they came online right now, and make no mistake, there is both patron and proxy here, is that Iran is looking to create multiple hotspots in the region while insulating itself from any kind of kinetic blowback. And these multiple hotspots are designed to raise the risks of America continuing to stand with Israel as the Jewish state fights Hamas, and try to use the specter of a wider war to get America to enter and put the political handcuffs on Israel, a la a series of deconfliction agreements that you saw like in the 1973 war.
So what stops America from entering into some sort of kinetic blowback directly against the patron rather than the proxy?
Well, both the political impediment against responding kinetically to the patron and the proxy is in the very short term the same, meaning that the Biden administration currently believes that any attempt to signal resolve by punishment, meaning to deter them kinetically, would lead to another cycle of escalation, something the administration believes it can ill afford to entertain and politically has signaled that. The problem is when you have the capability to do so, but politically signal that you don't have the will to act on the capability, when you surge in more carriers, when you bring in more military assets into the region, the move becomes merely costly and self-defeating because the adversary is willing to gamble that you may have the capability, but not the resolve to use it.
Well, it's definitely a very grim situation if it is not resolved. Behnam, thank you very much for understanding the power dynamics in the region and also the political will and how that causes a crisis that we're seeing unfold. I'm going to return back to the studio briefly because, Dan, you said, well, you were with the AP, your bureau was covering the developments in Yemen, and you had more or less watched the development of the Houthis into a critical fighting force.
Yeah, and you know, what began as something that seemed almost comic and weird on the ground became very quickly a major strategic threat to the world. Because it's very clear that Iran wanted to take over Yemen via the Houthis, to use them as another proxy, this time from the south of Israel, not the north, threatening the world essentially with a cutoff of trade through the Suez Canal, much as they can do the same in the Strait of Hormuz. This is an outrage. It cannot be Israel's problem. Israel does not have any claim upon Yemen. They are engaging in piracy at this point, and the sort of rate card for punishment versus outrage, it tends to get set in stone in this region. I think the world needs to take a good look at the situation in Yemen and decide if the Houthis don't need punishing and deterring. But I would caution that they've proven quite resilient. The Yemen war has, in less than a decade, cost almost 400,000 lives. Partly through disease and cholera or whatever, but at least close to 200,000 directly through fighting.
That is not going to be an easy problem to solve, especially when you have the fact that many regional powers are on the other side of this. And we're going to continue this discussion. That's because Turkish President Recep Erdogan is again endorsing terrorists and accusing Israel of all manner of international crimes for daring to fight back against Hamas after the terror group murdered 1,200 Israelis in cold blood on October 7th. Let's listen to the leader of a regional power and NATO member on this.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the butcher of Gaza, is not only a war criminal, but he will definitely be tried as the butcher of Gaza, just like Slobodan Milosevic, the former president of Serbia, was tried. Netanyahu, the butcher of Gaza, personally revealed in front of the cameras that the issue is not just Gaza or Ramallah, but that he is pursuing expansionist goals. Therefore, defending Gaza and Palestine today means defending Mecca, Medina, Istanbul, Damascus, Beirut, Baghdad, other Islamic lands along with Jerusalem.
And back to you, Dan. Erdogan, Turkey, what?
Erdogan's on a high after having won or at least engineered a seeming victory in a number of close elections. He fashions himself a leader of the Muslims. The Muslims are up in arms right now over what's happening in Gaza, and I don't think Israel can expect very much from this fellow.
That's given how much Israel had been hoping for a rapprochement with Turkey. Obviously not in the cards.
As Netanyahu says, that's life.
Very, very short way to describe that sort of situation, and probably a good thing that Israel has spent a lot of time in the past few years making sure to reinforce their agreements with Greece and Cyprus.
Yes, indeed.
But you had some other remarks.
Look, I think Israel needs to start articulating its own vision for the day after that goes a little bit beyond strictly who's going to rule Gaza. And it needs to accelerate the change from Hamas, and it needs to offer something other than crushing Hamas into the ground at the cost to civilians that we have seen. I certainly would advise offering a Beirut scenario where, when pushed far enough, Hamas might conceivably agree to evacuate the Gaza Strip en route to Qatar, or who knows, given what we've seen of Erdogan, perhaps he'd be eager to have them in Turkey.
Well, nobody else is willing to take them, but he's certainly willing to endorse them. Well, thank you very much, Dan, for breaking this all down for us. I do want to bring a little bit more news from the home front. That is, of course, the volunteering effort to ensure that Israel, particularly the farming communities, can continue to exist after the ransacking and the destruction they faced on October 7th. A group of volunteers came today to help farmers in the coastal Israeli village of Rishpon. Among them were representatives of Taiwan in Israel. I-24 News correspondent Uri Shapira has more.
More than 8,000 kilometers separates Israel and Taiwan, but today it seems that the two countries are closer than ever. Officials from Taiwan have decided to join the current Israeli war effort and volunteer to work in the fields of the coastal village of Rishpon.
Since the whole world looked at October 7th Hamas terrorists in Haro, Taiwan was one of the first countries to express our solidarity with Israel and express our condolence to the perished people. And the political support is very strong. And over the past 30 years, the social foundation between the two societies and people are also very deep-rooted. So we feel it's important to come more support with the civilian sectors, including agriculture sectors.
This is a part of a project led by Hashomer Hadash, or the New Guard, an Israeli organization which helps farmers across the country. Its co-founder says that walking in the field is a prime goal in Israel today, as there is a lack of tens of thousands of workers.
The power of this nation, the power of the people, the power of the society inside Israel. This is the strongest power that we have. And to tell you the truth, I spoke with the Minister of Education and I told him, please let the students come to the field for a few months to the field, stop the learning and come to the field and work, because people all over Israel need to eat.
Among the volunteers, we found Yanir and Maayan, two students and a couple who decided to take time off university and contribute to local industry.
It's a tough job, but it is very rewarding.
Exactly.
It is nice to see the container getting full of fruit.
I think that working in the field really binds us as a couple.
Yes.
The Taiwanese representative in Israel says that despite the different cultures, Israel and Taiwan have a lot in common.
Like Israel, Taiwan has been under constant threat from our neighbor country, China. We understand the commitment to defend the homeland, and we understand the commitment to exercise the right of defense.
Despite the hot weather, volunteers are not worried by the hard work and continue their contribution, one of many, since October 7.
And a quick update on the war front. There is media in Gaza reporting fierce clashes and airstrikes between the IDF as well as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the areas surrounding Khan Yunis, as well as the central city of Deir al-Balah and the north of the Strip and Beit Lahia to the north. Smoke bombs, smoke screens are being deployed near the Kamal Adwan hospital, likely because there is an attempt to crack the Hamas fortifications underneath. Hamas having used the hospitals across Gaza as strongholds since the beginning of the war.